Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Who Are the Entities podcast. I am Louis Ungett. Today, I'm going to just take some questions about the book that I have coming out here very soon in a couple weeks, less than that, on the 29th of August. This book will be released. There will be an e-copy that you can pre-order now. There will be a paperback, and there will be an Audible version of this book. All three will be available hopefully on the 29th. The only one you can pre-order right now is the ebook. But I've got a promise up until the time when the audiobook is available. If you show me that you've bought the ebook, I will send you a free copy of the MP3 for the Audible book. If that's something you're interested in. And if you're trying to get a hold of the audiobook, because I know a lot of people like to listen to books on the way to work or whatever. So that's an offer to you. You can contact me through louisungett.substack.com or on my Twitter, which is at IamLouisU. Anyway, let's jump into it here. Please like and subscribe this channel, by the way. So today I'm going to just take some questions about this book. These are questions that have been asked to me either in person or online. And I thought it might be interesting just to go through that. So number one, why did you write Return of the Dragon? Return of the Dragon, subtitled "The Shocking Way Drugs Shape Religions Drugs and Religions Shape Societies and People." And the reason I wrote it really came down to it came down to me like learning about a particular drug, which is called DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is the active ingredient in an Incan brew called ayahuasca. And I heard about the effects of it and I found it fascinating, right? So I found out that when people take this ayahuasca or this DMT, they see the shapes that look like Mesoamerican art, the zigzags, the stepped lines, those kind of things that you see on the sides of temples and pyramids in Mexico, today's Mexico. Like Aztec work and Mayan work, etc. So that's one thing they see, like heavenly geometries, and it's amazingly consistent. It's across different cultures. You take skeptical atheists that do it, you take spiritual hippies that do it, and you take indigenous tribes that do it, and they all see the same things. And then in addition to that, a giant percentage of the people that take ayahuasca see entities, and entities is the word that typically gets used for this, but some people, if you're from a more traditional culture, you might call it a god. If you're from, modern day Christianity, you might call it an angel, a demon, or whatever. But whatever it is, you see this entity. And the interesting thing is that, we all dream about things, right? You dream when you're, every night you dream and you see things, and then you wake up and they're not real. Well, the interesting thing about DMT or ayahuasca is that people come down from the high and they continue to believe they're real. They insist that they're real. They insist that what they saw was real. And some of the interviews I saw and stuff that showed that people not only thought they were real, thought that they were more real than this world. So in other words, they went to a place that was more solid than the three dimensions we live in, which is pretty interesting. And what I found, this wasn't just like drugged out hippies that were saying this. You would get skeptical atheists that would go take DMT, come back, and they would say, no, that was real. That, that was actually real. And it's interesting, a majority of atheists that took DMT ceased to be atheists afterwards. They've done some controlled studies on this, so it's pretty wild. And when you start studying people that have studied it, when you start reading authors like Rick Strassman, you read authors like Graham Hancock, David Luke, people that really have spent a lot of time looking at the data involved, they're all pretty, they say it to different levels of strength, but they're all pretty open to the fact that this may be somehow helping us to interact with something in a different dimension that's real, that's outside of us. So I think when the average person hears, oh, they took psychedelics and they saw something, they kind of laugh it off as, oh, they dreamed about something. But I think people that know what they're talking about, people that actually spend time with it, say, no, there's actually something out there. There's something beyond what's going on in your head, and you're actually contacting something out there. And so then kind of the whole premise of the book, to get to the question, why did you write the book? The whole premise of the book is I found that out. And I said, who are these entities? So if we are seeing something, what are they? And are they good or bad? Are they indifferent towards humans? Do they care about humans? Do they, what's their attitude towards us? And I think a lot of people that are taking this drug are just assuming that on some level they're higher beings, so they must be good, or they're saying good stuff that sounds good, so they must be good. But I think it's important, especially if they are real beings and they're higher than us, they're more intelligent and more powerful than us. It's very important to understand what their attitude towards humans are. Are they human lovers? Kind of like, we're more powerful than puppies. Humans are more powerful than puppies, and we like puppies. We try and look out for them. We try not to hurt them. In general, a puppy is in good shape if it finds a human, because in general, humans like puppies. On the other hand, humans don't like cockroaches. We don't like centipedes in your basement or whatever. And so a centipede would do very good to avoid coming around a human. A cockroach would do very good to avoid coming around a human, because the human, as soon as it sees them, is going to try and destroy them. Or take like ants, for example. We don't want ants in our house. And so if you start seeing ants around your house, you might go out and buy some ant traps. And the ant traps to the ants smell and taste like food, but they're actually poison. And so what the ants do is they'll see an ant trap, they'll think it's a bunch of food, they'll go tell their friends, everybody goes to eat it, and then they all start dying. And that is my concern. My question is, if there's these entities, do they relate to us like we relate to puppies? Or do they relate to us like we relate to an insect, a pest? And that's the premise of the book. And I don't want to spoil it with more. So let's go on to the next question. So what qualifies me to write it? I have gotten this question a couple of times, and I think it's somewhat funny question, because I really think that every work should not rest on the laurels of, or the academics or whatever of the author. I've read some very highly credentialed people that have written garbage, and I've read some stuff by people that have no apparent credentials whatsoever that have written brilliant, amazing stuff. And you go back on the kind of the history of some of the greatest works in history, and there's very few guidelines, and there's very few credentials that you look at some of the people that accomplish the most. In the time of Aristotle, for example, his credentials were like he listened to other philosophers. They didn't have universities back then. Or you go to like Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton did have a real PhD, but if you study how he learned it, he had no credentials whatsoever for that. So anyway, I don't. What I mean is he earned his PhD. His PhD advisor basically was non-existent. So he was self-taught. Isaac Newton was completely self-taught. So let's talk about my qualifications. So I believe that being a generalist is very important for a lot of different areas of knowledge. And I think it's important to read broadly, study broadly, and understand a lot of different subjects. And I think when you do that, sometimes you'll see some things other people don't. And that certainly has been my experience in life, from in terms of education and reading. I have always been a generalist. So I have a degree in engineering, and I have a degree in business. I have a degree in theology, and I read 50 books a year. And I read on every subject you can think of. So, in terms of my qualifications, I would say I'm as well positioned as anybody. This is a subject, if you read the book, it's a subject that spans history, it spans theology, it spans philosophy, it spans the chemistry of drugs, science. So there's a wide spectrum of subjects here, and you almost have to be a generalist to really understand this and interact with it. With that being said, I'd like to go back to my first point: is the qualifications are nothing. It's the work itself that matters. And I have given this book to a lot of people. There's been a lot of advanced copies. It's not released yet, but thus far, all the feedback has been that it was well argued and very interesting. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you do check it out. And I think you will if you do. What does the title mean? This can be a real quick one, but the Return of the Dragon. One of the themes in the book is that one of the entities that people see while on DMT and other drugs is this serpent animal, this sometimes a serpent human hybrid, and sometimes in the form of a dragon. But it's a consistent theme. If you go throughout Europe, you go throughout Aboriginal Australia, you see Mesoamericans, the Inca and the Maya, and you go to the tribes of North America, the Illini, and you go to the Vikings. I mean, like every society in history has had some kind of, including in the Bible, has some kind of serpent god associated with them. And I make the case in this book that serpent god is, because of the frequency that people see it while on DMT, and the frequency that we see it in history as one of the gods that's worshipped, that there's a parallel there. And I don't want to spoil the book, but it's not a good parallel. And I asked kind of, what does this serpent god want? And, if you go throughout history, usually it's not good things. So I don't want to talk too much about that because it'll spoil the book, but that's what the title means. And it's a theme throughout the book. Number 4, if psychedelics have good effects on some people, doesn't that disprove your point? So my point being that, this book is skeptical towards the legalization and goodness of psychedelics, and is intended to kind of put up some warning signs about the mainstreaming of psychedelics that's going on right now. And so, do the good effects of psychedelics disprove my point? And I would say no, they don't. I actually spend a lot of time in my book talking about the good effects of psychedelics, and I touch on some of them. They apparently are useful in helping people quit smoking. They can help people with anxiety. They can help people with creative problems. If they're trying to come up with a solution to something, sometimes they can help with creativity and that kind of thing. I definitely address that. As a matter of fact, my brother, when he read this book, said that he thought that I almost was too positive towards psychedelics at points. And so I do address the positive effects, but I will say the negative effects, the potential for negative effects. Let's go back to who are the entities. If you have these godlike beings that are desperate to kind of reach out and interact with us, and if their intent is not good, some additional creativity or some additional benefits here or there do not outweigh the danger that you could possibly introduce to society as a whole when you open that Pandora's box. I have a friend that came to faith due to DMT. How could it be bad? So I've heard this a couple times of people that said, hey, I did DMT and or I did some other psychedelic, and I came to the realization that God's real, and now I'm a Christian, and I thank God for that. I think to answer this question, God absolutely can use our bad behavior, and he can use it for good. That is a different thing than saying he wants us to do those things, right? So, I know people that were alcoholics, and through trying to overcome alcoholism, they came to faith. And I don't think that makes alcoholism good. I know people that were, sexually immoral and kind of fell into the descent of hedonism, and then at some point in time realized that they had gone down a wrong path. I don't think that makes hedonism good. Furthermore, I think the again, we to get back to kind of what I said on the last question, which is I don't think I don't think some good effects necessarily outweigh all bad effects, right? So let's say drugs, doing these drugs as a whole leads one guy to faith, but then leads 100 people down a horrible path of destruction and death and horror. Well, I would say as a whole, it's not doing a very good job, right? Like it's not leading people in the right way. And I definitely think that's the case with psychedelics, is that the overall effect is bad, even if you can point to particular situations where there were good effects. Have you ever done psychedelics? Yeah, so I talk about this in the book. This is a question people a lot of times ask me when they hear I wrote a negative book on this, or they hear me talking about it. They just assume I have no experience. I don't know what I'm talking about. And it's an embarrassing thing for me in some ways because, yeah, I don't like to talk about the stupid things I did in the past, and I don't like to air this laundry. I know my kids will read this book and my mother will read this book, but the short answer to this question is yes, I have. When I was in high school and early college, made many bad decisions in life. But one of them was I did mushrooms, I did LSD, I did mescaline, and did marijuana, all within that time of my life. And so, yeah, I absolutely have. And the reason I included this in the book, and the reason I'm willing to admit it here, is that I think it's important. The subject is so important to me. I think it's such a relevant and important subject for society right now, because there's this mainstreaming of these drugs, that I didn't want this to be an objection that people could throw at me. So you haven't tried them, or you haven't done them. You don't know what you're talking about. And so I thought it was valid to say I actually do know what I'm talking about. I know the experience. I've been it. I lived it. I know how important it feels at the time. And I do talk about that in the book. So yeah, that answers that question. Number 7, you talk about Adam and Eve seeing the serpent. Is it your case that the forbidden fruit was a psychedelic? So yeah, this question I've gotten, I do touch on Adam and Eve, both in chapter 1 and in chapter 10. This is, by the way, this book is not religious, overtly religious in any way. As a matter of fact, very much written from a secular perspective. But I do talk about Adam and Eve just because I find it interesting that, all these people are seeing these serpents on drugs. And that's one of the objections atheists have to Christianity is, serpents can't talk. But then you talk to atheists that have done DMT, and they'll say, yeah, I talked to a serpent. and the serpent was real. And it's, they'll insist that it was a real serpent and it really talked, and as a real being in a different dimension that they absolutely did talk to. So I find it a very interesting question of, like, people laugh off the Adam and Eve story because there's a talking serpent, and yet they have talked to serpents. So, and you find sane, normal people that try psychedelics or try DMT, and they will admit they also have talked to a psychedelic. So I do talk about Adam and Eve. I do make it clear I was not making the case that the fruit was a psychedelic. I do find it interesting that God prohibits very strongly any kind of spiritual use of drugs throughout the Bible. And that's the opening story, is a serpent and a forbidden fruit of some sort. Like, it's interesting. But I also note it could just be, the forbidden fruit could just be a symbol or whatever. So it's not necessarily that's what's going on. But it is an interesting parallel for sure. So definitely not making that case. I just find it interesting. Why is pot bad? So a lot of people will say, okay, get your point on DMT, the entities, blah, blah, blah. Why is pot bad? Because marijuana is being very, very mainstream right now. My general argument on psychedelics as a whole is the kind of the stronger the worse, and the more you're interacting with that other world, the worse it is. So in other words, I think DMT, where it basically is this almost like a portal where people will see this spirit world or this entity world. I think that's should be something that raises some alarm bells for us as a society. On the other end of the spectrum, in terms of psychedelic strength, pot is probably as low as you can go. But it still is in that category, and it still has the similar effects, just to a weaker degree. And I think if the whole point of this book is to kind of a warning sign that these entities are real things and it may not have our best interest in mind, I think it's dangerous to even kind of dabble with that. It seems like it's to open that door at all if you've got a super natural, ultra powerful, very smart entity on the other side of that door. I don't think you should open it even a crack. But yeah, I think it's certainly less dangerous than a DMT. That's for sure. The downside is that I think people do it a lot more. Right. So it's on one hand, it's less dangerous. On the other hand, because of the frequency of use and the widespread acceptance, you could argue it actually has some potential for really bad stuff. Didn't the early church do psychedelics? This is an objection I have gotten multiple times, and I address it head on in the book. Brian Rescue went on Joe Rogan, basically argued that the early church did do psychedelics. He wrote a book called The Immortality Key, in which he tries to make that case. I read that book, and I'll spoil that book for anybody that was going to read it. He provides zero evidence that the early church did psychedelics. He kind of makes the case that, and I think he's right here, that the Greeks were doing psychedelics in their Dionysian cult, and kind of makes the case that that they were being practiced throughout the Roman Empire, and does find some forensic evidence that the Dionysian cult was doing it in the 3rd century in Spain. He finds some forensic evidence, and I actually appreciate the case he made there. But in terms of tying it to actual Christianity, he doesn't make that case at all. And as a matter of fact, doesn't even try to make that case. He to some degree tries to make the case that the Gnostic movement, which was an offshoot, a heretical offshoot of Christianity, tries to make the case that they used it. I don't think he even does a particularly good job there, but even if he did, that's not Orthodox Christianity. And so he does not make the case that Orthodox Christianity, that what we now define as the universal church, or the Catholic Church with small c, was ever pushing psychedelics. And the answer is absolutely not. And as a matter of fact, the point I make in my book is that, to the contrary, the warnings both in scripture and in the earliest writings of the church are almost insane in their prohibition of it, their hatred of it, their contrast to it, their not allowing it whatsoever. And we have writings, the Didache written in 90 AD, and the Ignatius of Antioch writing in 110. AD and early 2nd century, Shepherd of Hermes, writing, in the living memory of some of the people that had interacted with Jesus. They're all anti-psychedelic. They're all anti the use of drugs for spiritual purposes. The word in the Bible is pharmakia. That's the Greek. And Paul condemns it, says you can't enter the kingdom of God if you practice pharmakia. Book of Revelation has several strong condemnations. Other Jewish writings from the time had very strong condemnation. So early church did not do psychedelics. Number 10, what is your next book going to be about? Good question. I actually don't know. I've got a number of books in the works. It depends on what goes on with this book. If people are interested in the subject, and if there's some demand for it, I've got another kind of partial book on this subject, more talking about the history of the modern psychedelic movement, where it came from, some pretty amazing stuff associated with that. So that's a possibility of my next subject. I also write on a whole lot of other subjects, and I wrote a book called The Emperor Has No Clothes that I've actually paused in terms of selling, and I'm thinking about breaking that up into particular subjects from that book, maybe doing a series or whatever. So so that may be coming next, but short answer to this question is I don't know yet, but stay tuned. If you follow me on Louis Unget .substack.com, you can stay up to date on all of my future projects. And I do have a lot of stuff in the works. So a lot of exciting stuff will be coming soon. So thank you for listening to the Who Are the Entities podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video. Don't forget to check out my Substack. Follow me on Twitter at IamLouisU. And thanks so much for listening. I hope that you all have a great day.